Monday Night Raw. Monday Night Raw tonight emanates from Madison Square Garden. Of course, it doesn't. It emanates from the WWE Performance Center in Orlando, Florida, for another 3-hour episode on the USA Network. The match we're going to be talking about specifically here, though, is the Raw Women's Championship. What is going on with that darn Raw Women's Championship? Now, of course, at the horror show at Extreme Rules, it was Asuka versus Sasha Banks for the Raw Women's Championship. And I think most people, myself included, expected Asuka to retain the championship there and defeat Sasha Banks in what would be a tremendous match. And it absolutely was a really tremendous match. It was really well done by both competitors. In my opinion, probably the best match of the night. And that was, I think, was expected anyway. I was calling for a long, long time to actually have Asuka versus Sasha Banks be the main event of the show. Thank God it wasn't, though. And that's no slight against either female. The reason that I say thank God it wasn't the main event was because of the horrible, horrible, horrible finish to that match, which was a recurring theme at Extreme Rules. The finishes and the creative for all of the finishes on that show were just horrific, quite in line with the horror show theme there. It was just so bad. So what happened at Extreme Rules, basically, to try and last time I tried to say this on the instant reaction on the live stream, it took me about 20 minutes to say what I was meaning to say in about 1 minute. But essentially, Asuka has the match won. She then tries to use the green mist, but accidentally sprays the referee in the face. We then have Bayley come in and use the championships, the women's championship, hit Asuka. But Sasha Banks then goes for the cover. But the problem is because there's no referee, because it was this confusing even for me to say, let alone watch. So they had the referees down because he's blinded. So Bayley takes the referee shirt off of the referee, counts the 3 count, even though she's not an actual official. And Sasha Banks leaves as the Raw Women's Champion, or the self-proclaimed Raw Women's Champion, even though she's not the Raw Women's Champion. And then they basically had her and Bayley walk around on television this past week, holding both the Women's Tag Team Championships, and Bayley holding the SmackDown Women's Championship, and Sasha Banks holding the Raw Women's Championship. I got there in the end. Now, last week on Raw, we had Sasha Banks and Bayley in the ring cutting one of their promos again, and Stephanie McMahon appeared on the screen. Yes, I'm surprised she didn't shout "Welcome to Monday Night Raw," because apparently that's what she always does when she's on Monday Night Raw. Do you remember that? Every Monday it felt like "Welcome to Monday Night Raw," and it was just, oh, please stop. So she announced that the true champion will be determined this coming Monday night on Raw, tonight on Monday Night Raw, when Asuka and Sasha Banks clash for the title. I hate this. Oh, we'll find out who the true champion is. It's Asuka. Obviously, I'm assuming that if you would have said that it was a no contest, but realistically, you would probably have disqualified Asuka for using the green mist in the first place, which you shouldn't use. That's the disqualification. But then green misting the official is a disqualification, so Asuka is the Raw Women's Champion. That's the logic there. But we're not living in logic when it comes to some of WWE's booking at the moment. So we're going to find out who the true Raw Women's Champion is tonight on Monday Night Raw, as Asuka and Sasha Banks clash for the Raw Women's Championship. However, there is a stipulation or stipulations in this match that the championship can change hands by pinfall, submission, countout, or disqualification if anybody interferes. Essentially neutralizing that if Bayley interferes on behalf of Sasha Banks, then Asuka can once again become WWE Raw Women's Champion. I don't know. It's just so bizarre. That doesn't mean Bayley won't interfere, of course. That just means if she gets caught by interference. So Stephanie McMahon, of course, made that stipulation coming out of the horror show at Extreme Rules, where there was a controversial finish when Bayley counted the referee's count with the referee shirt on. Just, what a horrible finish that is. But what is interesting... Now, of course, once again, I hope this is the main event because it will be the best match for the show without a shadow of a doubt, and I think it will be the main event of this show, so that's great. You would like to hope that in a 3-hour broadcast, they can at least get 15-20 minutes of good wrestling in for this match, so they can tell a story, they can work. What I must say about the Sasha Banks versus Asuka feud so far is that their chemistry in the ring is just phenomenal. It is really, really good, and both females work really well with each other. I don't think they've had a bad match so far, whether it's been in tag team matches, whether it's been the singles match at Extreme Rules. The finish aside, the creative from the creative team aside, the wrestling has been really, really good, and the matches have been really, really good. So I'm sure we'll get the same tonight, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing another Asuka versus Sasha Banks. This is a rematch that I don't mind seeing. A lot of the time with WWE and their rematch culture, it's kind of, well, just by the very nature of what a rematch is, it's very repetitive and it feels like you've watched it a million times and it's just boring. But if it's a good match, then you can kind of tolerate it a bit more, and that's the case here with Asuka and Sasha Banks. They have good chemistry, they have good matches, and you can't turn away with good wrestling, can you? So I'm looking forward to that tonight. I think that's going to be a really fun and good match. But what is interesting when it comes to Asuka versus Sasha Banks, and this may be a potential spoiler, so if you don't want to have any potential spoilers or any possible spoilers, stop now. I will give you about 5 seconds of dead air to leave the video. Right, are they gone? Are they gone? Are the people that don't want to be spoiled gone? Because there are possible spoilers. Now, due to the current situation with COVID-19 and the pandemic, especially in America, especially in Florida, WWE have been taping more than one episode of television at a time. So they're no longer doing the live broadcast, which they were doing previously. They're doing sort of bulk tapings of episodes of Raw and SmackDown of NXT. So far, what they've been doing is kind of taping 2 a week. And then being on tape until they get to the pay-per-view, which they then do live, unless it's cinematic match, which of course would have been pre-taped too. So the 20th of July, last Monday's episode of Raw, was taped last week, along with today's episode of Raw, the 27th, on Monday night, on the 20th of July. So these dates get a bit confusing here, but last week's episode of Raw and next week's to this week was taped last week on Monday night. And then the following night, Tuesday, the 21st of July, saw the 24th of July episode of SmackDown, so that was last week's, and next week's episode of SmackDown, the 31st of July episode of SmackDown being taped. So you've got 2 weeks of Raw and SmackDown being taped at one period of time. Now, while the result of the match has not yet been completely clarified, we might have actually been spoiled once again about the outcome of this match. Now, on Friday night during the airing of SmackDown, Sasha Banks took to Twitter to share a photo of herself posing with both the WWE Tag Team Championship and the Raw Women's Championship, right? You would think that's pretty innocuous, nothing going on there. Well, it's just a photo. Now, what I must preface this by saying before I go into it is that this doesn't mean anything, but it's something interesting, and I have to give credit to Gary Cassidy for at Wrestling Gary Sportskeeda, a fellow Sportskeeda native like myself, for pointing this out. If you look a little closely at the post, and you look closely at the Raw Women's Championship in the post and on SmackDown, it's very clear that the Sasha Banks, the boss, side plates have been screwed on, which wasn't the case this past week on Friday Night SmackDown. On Friday Night SmackDown, when Sasha Banks was in the ring, and when she was on commentary, they had the Asuka side plate still on the side. However, in this post on social media by Sasha Banks, it actually had the boss side plate screwed in. It's very interesting because Sasha Banks, in the photo shoot for the post she put on Twitter, is wearing the same outfit that she was on this week's SmackDown. So the shoot most likely was conducted on the same day of those tapings. Now, it's worth pointing out that at the point of SmackDown being conducted, Sasha Banks versus Asuka for this week's episode of Monday Night Raw was already filmed. Now, 2 episodes of SmackDown were recorded last week, so WWE may have changed the side plates on the championship between tapings so that the new plates were in place for next week's SmackDown, following possibly a title change on Raw. It's a very curious thing. So what potentially could have happened here? Because I'm seeing people will say, well, how does that even work? So potentially what we could have here is a situation whereby during the Raw tapings last week, on the second episode that was taped, tonight's episode of Monday Night Raw, Sasha Banks defeats Asuka and becomes the Raw Women's Champion. The following night on SmackDown, they're taping the episode of SmackDown that aired last week, the July 24th episode, but because the title change hasn't happened yet, and Sasha Banks is still carrying around Asuka's championship, they have to screw back on Asuka's side plates. Then what happens? Between the taping of the July 24th and the July 31st episode of SmackDown, they have to switch over the side plates for the championship, because Asuka, of course, has beaten Sasha Banks has beaten Asuka that previous Monday night on Raw. It's very confusing. This is what happens when you tape a lot of television at once. So that photo shoot could be potentially from when the in-between tapings from the first episode of SmackDown to the second episode of SmackDown. My point being that the spoiler potentially here could be that Sasha Banks defeats Asuka tonight on Monday Night Raw for the Raw Women's Championship. Which, if that is the case, it's very, very surprising. I mean, in terms of investigative journalism and Sherlock Holmes-ism by Gary Cassidy there, it's unbelievable. Like, spotting that is, like, top-notch stuff. So credit to him. It is very, it's fascinating. If it's a case of Sasha Banks spoiling it, I don't blame her. It's not a massive issue. I don't think she would have thought that she would have been giving it away at all. But it's certainly interesting, isn't it? It's certainly interesting. And people will say, well, that's just, you're reading too much into it. But there's a lot of chaos that's going on with WWE, and there's so much chaos that's going on with WWE at the moment. And I think with this, with all the chaos that's happening backstage at these tapings because of COVID-19, because of social distancing, because of masks, because of testing, etc., etc. Things like this, the little details fall between the cracks. And I think that's the case of this happening here. I really, really do. Now, they've tried to keep up with continuity, and they've tried to make things work by screwing back on Asuka's side plates for last week's episode of SmackDown, and then screwing on Sasha Banks' side plates for the following episode of SmackDown. But what they didn't intend was that Sasha Banks would have a photo shoot and post that picture of her with the Raw Women's Championship last week during SmackDown. This is where it gets really, really complicated. But potentially now we're looking at a scenario where Sasha Banks defeats Asuka Monday night on Raw. Now, if they do that, to me it would be quite disappointing, considering I don't think Asuka really has been given a championship reign worthwhile. She was the hottest act, in my opinion, in general, going earlier this year, especially during those empty arena shows, which were difficult. WWE didn't know what they were doing at the time. It was chaos. They still had empty seats being shown. They had the hard camera on the wrong side. All of it was just very confusing and didn't make a lot of sense. The one constant during those shows, during Raw and during SmackDown, was that Asuka was tremendous. They would even put her on commentary because she was just that good at being entertaining. That's what got her over. And those empty arena shows is really why she came to the forefront. That's why she won Money in the Bank. That's why she became the Raw Women's Champion, because Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard and Paul Heyman at the time thought, she's the person. She's the person. She has been phenomenal during this pandemic era of professional wrestling and WWE that we're living through right now. She's the one that deserves it. Becky Lynch was going on maternity leave to go and have a child, so Asuka should be the one to take Becky's mantle and be the babyface champion. So that happened, and she did a fine job. But then even from the start, what happened during that period of time is Paul Heyman left. And because Paul Heyman was left, things started to change, really. And especially when it comes to Asuka's booking. You think about it, she was facing Nia Jax at Backlash. Most people thought, okay, going into it, Nia Jax hadn't really got under Asuka's skin that much. Yes, she'd come out at the end of Raw in Asuka's face paint, and that was about it. But any physical interaction they had, Asuka pretty much had got the upper hand. Nia Jax had cost her a match against Charlotte Flair in WWE, that's par for the course. But apart from that, people thought, okay, Asuka, she's going to get this long run as a champion. And especially beating Nia Jax at Backlash. At Backlash, we have a stupid double count-out, screwy finish. Everyone went, what? Why? Why couldn't she, in her first title defense, she can't beat the challenger? What the hell? And then the next defense she has is against Sasha Banks, and she has another screwy finish. Again, terrible creative finish. What the hell? Which then leads into this match with Sasha Banks this Monday night on Raw, tonight. And if she loses against Sasha Banks tonight, which it looks like she could, then what I would say is, what an underwhelming title reign, what an uninspiring title reign of something and someone that promised so much, but you never gave her the opportunity. You never gave her the opportunity. And people will say, well, you know, she was given the title, so how is that not an opportunity? Well, you can be given the title, but if you're given screwy finishes of double count out, people putting on the referee shirt and counting to a 3, and all of this sort of stuff, how are you meant to look like a credible champion? The moment on your first title defense, it was a double count out, your credibility just disappeared. Disappeared. Your first championship reign, 90% of the time, if you're going to be a long, credible champion, you have to win that first match decisively. That sets you up. I've always said that. And it's always been the case. That first feud is so important because that's the feud that sets you up as the champion you're going to be for your title reign. And a double count out against Nia Jax at Backlash ain't it. It ain't it, and it's not good enough. And that's been the case of Asuka. She hasn't felt the same since then. I thought she could have really had a great match with Sasha Banks at Extreme Rules, win that match, get a bit of momentum back, because I want this championship reign to work. And again, what happens? Great match, screwy finish. No one cares about the match now. The match was great, but everyone just cares about that finish. What the hell was that finish? Because the creative coming out of it is what everyone's talking about. So again, with that terrible finish, people are just going, Asuka just looks like the most petty champion. She can't beat anyone. Since she won it, she can't beat anyone. Any credible defense she has, either it's double count out or a screwy finish. So what happens there? So I can totally believe that Sasha Banks wins tonight. Totally. Because look at the way that Asuka's been booked since she became champion. So I could totally see that happening. Now, I don't have a massive problem, to be honest, with Sasha Banks winning the championship. To be honest, I'd rather it be a Raw superstar win the championship. But at this point, WWE's brand split is about as useful as a chocolate teapot. It's non-existent. It doesn't happen. So they can do their Raws whichever way they please. I do think it extends the Bayley-Sasha Banks feud, which I'm happy with, because I still think they can stretch that out until WrestleMania next year, which is what I'd like them to do, because I think we'll have fans back in some form by that point, whether it's in the stadium or not, whether if it's just in the arena. I think we'll have fans back by then. So Sasha Banks versus Bayley with fans in attendance needs to happen. You got to remember that's the match that stole the show at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn the first time. So to have that feud in WWE, I want WWE to take their time. I want them to build to it properly. And potentially Sasha Banks becoming Raw Women's Champion helps facilitate that. And it just makes the eventual breakup and breakdown of that relationship between Sasha Banks and Bayley even bigger. You know, the more you build them up, when they come crashing down, it's going to be great, and it's going to be a moment. If it's Sasha Banks that turns on Bayley, or if it's Bayley that turns on Sasha Banks, that moment is going to be huge. It's going to be one of those moments that they play every time you have a major Raw episode or a major SmackDown episode, because it's just going to be that important. It's going to get that many people talking. And I think it's WrestleMania worthy. So, in my opinion, I hope that maybe Sasha Banks winning the Raw Women's Championship helps stretch that out. So I think that's a positive to look at it on. A positive is that Sasha Banks and Bayley are still going to be on Raw and SmackDown and NXT every week, because whilst, in my opinion, Asuka was the MVP of the empty arena part of this pandemic era that we're living in WWE, I do think Bayley and Sasha Banks have been the MVPs of the NXT Performance Center recruits era of this pandemic era. Now that we've had fans, I say that in quotation marks, back at the shows, I do think Sasha Banks and Bayley have been the high points of most episodes of Raw, SmackDown, and NXT the last few weeks. They've been the one constant, and that's not just because they're on every show, but because they're on every show and they don't feel overexposed, and whatever they do on the show is entertaining and pretty damn good. I really enjoyed Sasha Banks and Bayley on commentary this week on SmackDown, and they continue to do a fantastic job, and they definitely shouldn't lose the Women's Tag Team Championships anytime soon. Bayley shouldn't drop the SmackDown Women's Championship anytime soon. Does Sasha Banks need to be the Raw Women's Champion? I think this is part of the process, perhaps, of building Sasha Banks up to have Bayley kind of maybe screw her over eventually. I don't know. But I think it does help facilitate that storyline, so that's the positive there. Personally, I'd have Asuka retain the title here, and perhaps maybe that still happens. You know, we haven't had anything confirmed yet. This is just speculation and online sleuthing. So perhaps Asuka does retain or capture or re-win, I don't know, the Raw Women's Championship tonight. We'll have to wait and see. The only way we can find out is by watching Monday Night Raw tonight. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on tonight's potential Raw Women's Championship change? Do you think we're going to see Sasha Banks defeat Asuka for the Raw Women's Championship? Are you looking forward to the match? What are your predictions for Monday Night Raw and the rest of the show tonight? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I really do appreciate everyone that takes the time to drop a comment. I'll be sure to interact and reply with you in the comment section. If you have enjoyed this video, please do give us a like. It really just helps us out on the channel in terms of going up people's rankings on YouTube and going into people's recommendation feeds. So so I really do appreciate that. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to WrestleNews 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, closing in on 600, so you never know. If you haven't subscribed already, you could be the 600 subscriber, and I would really appreciate that. If you have subscribed already, I really appreciate that you taking the time to watch the videos, interact with them, and I hope you really enjoy them. If you haven't already, please do follow us on social media too. The handles are on the screen right now, and the links are in the description box below. It's at 365Wrestle on Twitter and at WrestleNews365 on Facebook and Instagram, so be sure to give us a like or a follow there if you wish. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you've come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.